Okay, imagine this. You finally found the perfect apartment, signed the lease, maybe even started planning the move. There's this real buzz, isn't there?
Definitely. That feeling of getting the keys is something else.
But then, bam, life throws a massive curveball. Maybe it's an amazing job offer, but it's across the country. Or something more personal, like we saw examples involving a canceled wedding. Suddenly, moving in isn't just inconvenient, it's impossible.
Yeah, those sudden changes can be incredibly stressful.
So you haven't even taken occupation, not a single box moved. But that contract, you signed it. The big question we're tackling today is, what actually happens now? Can you break that lease before day one, and what does South African law say about it?
And that's exactly why we're diving deep into this. It's a scenario more common than you might think. Our mission here is to really unpack the legal framework for these early lease terminations in South Africa.
Oh.
We'll focus mainly on the protections you get from consumer laws, specifically the Consumer Protection Act, the CPA, and also touch on the Rental Housing Act, the RHA. Basically, we want to give you a clear path to avoid getting tangled in legal knots.
Right, let's get straight to it. The first thing, and this catches people out, is the legal status of that signed lease, even if you never move in. The moment you and the landlord sign a fixed-term agreement, it's legally binding. Canceling it, even before occupation, is still technically an early termination. There's no magic escape clause just because you haven't unpacked.
That's the crucial starting point. You are in a contract. But South African law has evolved. It recognizes that, life isn't always predictable, so it provides a really important tool for tenants.
And that's the Consumer Protection Act you mentioned, the CPA.
Exactly. The CPA is designed to protect consumers, and tenants are considered consumers in most residential lease situations.
So how does it help me if I need to cancel before moving in? Does the CPA just let me walk away clean?
Not quite walk away clean, but it gives you significant power. Specifically, Section 14 of the Act says a tenant can cancel a fixed-term lease pretty much anytime.
Anytime.
Anytime. The key condition is you have to give the landlord 20 business days written notice. That applies whether you're canceling halfway through or, like in our scenario, before you even start.
20 business days notice? That sounds actually quite reasonable.
But there's usually a catch, isn't there? Is there a financial hit?
Ah, yes, the catch. Giving that notice is your right, but it comes with an obligation. You, the tenant, must be prepared to pay a reasonable cancellation penalty.
Okay, reasonable. That sounds like a word lawyers love. We definitely need to unpack that.
We will,
Okay.
but first, there's a massive hurdle. Does the CPA even apply to your specific lease? Because it doesn't cover everyone.
Right. So how do I know if I qualify for this 20-day notice protection under the CPA?
Good question. There are two main conditions you need to meet for the CPA to apply here.
Yeah. First, the tenant must be a natural person. That just means you, an individual, not a company, not a trust, not some other legal entity.
So if I'm renting personally, that's tick one. What's the second?
The second relates to the landlord. They must be leasing out the property in the ordinary course of their business.
What does that mean exactly? Like, they have to be a big property company?
Not necessarily big, but renting property has to be part of their regular business activities. Think property developers, professional landlords, maybe someone using an agent managing multiple properties. It generally doesn't apply if your landlord is just, say, an individual renting out their granny flat as a once-off thing.
Okay, that distinction is important. Natural person tenant, landlord renting as a business. Are there situations where it definitely doesn't apply, even if those seem to fit?
Yes, there are clear exclusions. The CPA won't protect you if the lease is between two juristic entities, like a company renting from another company or a trust.
Makes sense.
Also, even if the tenant is a juristic entity, like a small company,
Yeah.
the CPA might still apply unless that entity has an annual turnover or asset value exceeding a certain threshold, currently 2 million rand.
Ah, the R2 million figure. So the law assumes bigger entities can look after themselves.
Pretty much. They're expected to have the resources to negotiate terms and understand the contract without the same level of consumer protection and individual needs. And of course, as we said, if the landlord isn't renting in the ordinary course of business.
So the bottom line is crucial here. If the CPA doesn't apply to your situation, maybe you rented through your small business, or your landlord is just a private individual doing a favor, Then what?
Then you're governed solely by the terms written in your lease agreement. Whatever cancellation clause is in there, that's what applies. That might mean a much longer notice period, like 2 or 3 months, or a fixed, potentially very high penalty.
Ouch. So rule number one is always read that cancellation clause carefully before signing.
Absolutely fundamental.
Okay, let's assume the CPA does apply. We're back to that word. Reasonable. What makes a cancellation penalty reasonable under the CPA? Because I imagine landlords or agents might just, quote, say, 2 months' rent automatically.
And that's often where the conflict arises. The CPA regulations, specifically Regulation 5, give clear guidance. A reasonable penalty is not meant to punish the tenant. It's solely to compensate the landlord for their actual financial loss directly caused by the cancellation.
Actual financial loss, not just some arbitrary figure plucked from the air.
Precisely. It has to be quantifiable. The law lists factors that must be considered when calculating it.
Okay, what are those factors?
Well, things like how much rent you're paying, how much time was left on the lease when you canceled.
Logically, canceling earlier hurts the landlord more.
Exactly.
Right.
Also, the length of notice you gave more notice helps them mitigate loss. And critically, the actual loss suffered. Did they manage to find a replacement tenant quickly?
So that's key, if they re-rent the place immediately.
The loss might be very small or even zero.
Let's use that example from their research, the couple canceling before moving in due to a canceled wedding. The agent suggests they could be liable for up to 3 months' rent. Let's say that's $45,000.
Okay.
But the property is snapped up by a new tenant within a week. Can the landlord still claim that $45,000?
Absolutely not, according to the CPA. If their actual loss was just, say, 1 week's lost rent plus maybe some minor advertising costs, perhaps a few thousand rand, then charging $45,000 would be completely unreasonable and unlawful.
So those agent warnings of 2 or 3 months rent penalty are often just worst case scenarios or maybe even just incorrect.
They can be incorrect or at least highly contestable. The landlord has a duty to mitigate, meaning they must take reasonable steps to find a new tenant. They can't just sit back, do nothing, and expect you to pay for months of vacancy if they could have filled it.
That's a really powerful protection for tenants. It shifts the focus to proven actual costs.
It does. If they re-rent it immediately after your notice period ends, their financial loss related to rent is essentially zero. The penalty should then only reflect other direct costs, like maybe agent fees for finding the new tenant, if applicable.
Okay, that clarifies the CPA's role on penalties.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the Rental Housing Act, the RHA. How does that fit into this picture, especially if I haven't even moved in?
The RHA is like the bedrock of the landlord-tenant relationship. It sets general rules for fair practice. While the CPA gives you the right to cancel early and defines the penalty, the RHA governs things like how deposits must be handled, the condition of the property, and procedures for inspections.
So it works hand in hand with the CTA.
Exactly. In an early cancellation scenario, the RHA reinforces that the landlord can only deduct documented costs from your deposit. They can recover proven financial losses, maybe the pro rata agent commission they already paid for your lease, or advertising costs to find a replacement.
But they need proof, receipts and invoices.
Absolutely. They can't just invent figures or keep the whole deposit out of spite. The RHA demands transparency and justification for any deductions. They can't claim for damages if you never occupied the property, for instance.
Okay, so CPA for the cancellation right and penalty amount, RHA for deposit handling and general fairness. What if, despite all this, the landlord insists on an unreasonable penalty? Say they charge me 2 months' rent even though the place was empty for just a week. Where do I go?
You have options, which is good news. First, always try to resolve it directly with the landlord or agent in writing. Explain your understanding of the CPA and reasonable penalties.
And if that doesn't work?
Then you can approach the Rental Housing Tribunal, or RHT. They offer free dispute resolution services across South Africa. They're very experienced in dealing with lease disputes, deposit issues, and unfair practices. It's often the quickest route.
Free dispute resolution sounds good. Is there anywhere else?
Yes, particularly if the core issue is the size of the penalty under the CPA.
Yeah.
You can lodge a complaint with the National Consumer Tribunal, the NCT.
ENCT.
Right. They specifically handle issues related to the Consumer Protection Act, including excessive penalties. They have the power to investigate the landlord's claimed losses and make a binding ruling on what constitutes a fair, reasonable penalty in line with the law.
So there are official bodies tenants can turn to. That's reassuring. Okay, let's pivot to practical advice. If I'm facing this awful situation I've signed, but I know I can't move in, What are the absolute best things I can do right now to minimize the financial damage?
Okay, top tips. First, give that written notice as soon as humanly possible. Don't delay.
Yeah.
The legal minimum is 20 business days, but if you know 3 months out, give 3 months notice. More time for the landlord means less potential loss for them to claim from you.
It makes sense. Give them the best chance to find someone else. What else?
Second, actively help them find a replacement tenant. This might sound counterintuitive, but it's in your best interest.
How so?
Cooperate fully with viewings. Maybe even leverage your own network. Perhaps you know someone looking. If you can help place a suitable tenant who can move in right as your notice ends, you essentially reduce the landlord's lost rent claim to zero. That significantly cuts down the potential penalty.
That's a proactive approach, so communication and cooperation are key.
Definitely. Keep everything in writing notice, offers of help, discussions about penalties, and for landlords listening in, the advice mirrors this.
What should landlords keep in mind?
Draft clear lease agreements that comply with the CPA and RHA from the start. If a tenant cancels early, be proactive in finding a replacement. And critically, keep meticulous records, advertising costs, communication attempts, any agent fees. Calculate the penalty based only on those proven actual losses. Fairness and documentation protect both parties.
Great advice for both sides. So let's wrap this up. The core takeaway from this deep dive seems to be that while signing a lease is binding, South African law, mainly through the CPA, gives tenants a statutory right to cancel early.
That's right. With 20 business days written notice, if the CPA applies.
And it's a big but. This comes with the responsibility to pay a reasonable cancellation penalty. And reasonable means covering the landlord's actual documented financial losses, not just some standard figure punishment fee.
Exactly. The crucial insight here, especially for you listening, is don't just accept the first penalty figure quoted, especially if it seems high, like 2 or 3 months' rent. Those figures are often maximums or starting points, not automatically legally enforceable amounts.
You have the right to question it.
You have the right and the legal backing via the CPA and potentially the RHA to challenge any penalty that exceeds the landlord's provable loss. And you have the RHC and NCT as avenues if you can't resolve it directly. Which leads me to a final thought for you to mull over. We've established the penalty hinges on the landlord proving actual loss. So how much power does a tenant gain? Not just by giving notice, but by actively presenting the landlord with 1 or maybe even 2 perfectly suitable vetted replacement tenants ready to sign a lease immediately. Does that effectively reduce the landlord's provable loss to almost nothing, shifting the negotiation power significantly? Something to think about.